Dr. Young, the president's policy is not actually a ban on stem cell research. It says that government money should not be used for it except under these very limited circumstances. Isn't there a case to be made that certain issues are so controversial, and even in a democracy, a minority feels so strongly about them that you should say, hey, people can do this if they want, but the impassioned minority shouldn't have to have its tax dollars spent on it?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, except the problem is the debate has been hijacked into areas and decisions and moral issues that have nothing to do with stem cells. It's not an issue of whether or not these are human beings when people or embryos become humans. It's not a matter of is it informed consent by the embryos. It's a matter of whether or not it's better to throw them away or use them. The parents have given their permission. They wanted to help people, so why don't we use them? But the debate was hijacked into all these theoretical things that won't happen. The same thing was true about the cloning. We're not talking about cloning armies of Hitler. It's an absurd situation that has occurred, that we would allow this very, very unlikely scenario of armies of clones to be the reason why we cannot do therapeutic cloning, and that is to produce stem cells that are isogenic with people so that they don't get immune rejection and the cells would do them some good. So let's make sure the debate doesn't go out of control, that we don't have the debate become a hostage of political agenda, and we must keep our eye on the ball, and that is to help people.
Pure research sort of comes first, and then technology finds ways to apply it, and then it seems always at the end of the race are the politicians who are trying to figure out how they can make an issue that they can get elected on, and then policy changes even slower. So it shouldn't be surprising that science races ahead, and then 20 years later, and usually policy only changes because there was some terrible thing happened, and then there was a cry to do something about it. Human cloning is actually an interesting situation where the governments have raced ahead to try to ban it even before anybody's done it. I don't remember that happening very often, and I think and stem cells is for me a bad example of where I probably shouldn't say that, but I do feel this, that where arguments, because there's this highly polarized argument about abortion, it somehow got transplanted onto something that it really had nothing to do with abortion. It's a case of where policy has really twisted something out of, where policy has been twisted by these pliers that weren't appropriate. I'm having mixed about 5 metaphors there, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, the history of man is full of ambitious people that are willing to use other people to achieve their own ends. So we're always going to have that. So we need government intervention.
I think there's always a role for regulation. I mean, there is a role for government. There are things that we should regulate. There are things that NGOs should be watching. Gene engineering, gene data is probably the single most powerful alphabet we've ever come up with. And unless if this is the first technology that we've ever had that doesn't have unintended consequences or that is not misused, which I don't think it is, we better be careful of some of the things we're doing. And we better have people asking questions. And I think it's good to have people asking questions. Asking questions is different from saying we will never do this stuff again. And we have to go back to, say, the 9th and the 13th century, when the center of world learning, the center of world openness, the center of scholarship was Baghdad University and was Damascus University. And it's when you turn your back on learning and turn your back on openness, and by the way, some of the great scientists at Damascus U were people who were exiles from a fundamentalist Christian Europe. And some of the great people were Jewish scholars. And in the measure that societies are open and accept and learn and question and challenge, but don't stop. You're going to get a successful nation. I think this country's been able to maintain that balance for a while. I hope it continues to do so.
I think that we should be all very humble about our ability to predict the future. And the problem is with legislation is that you're trying to predict the future. You're trying to anticipate all scenarios that might occur. You have to be careful. And I think that it's better to legislate a little at a time, dealing with known problems, rather than trying to deal with all the problems of the future and create these legislation that may actually impede progress. So we should take not these huge steps, but take step by step, rationally, with a lot of discussion, with the best advice possible.
Yeah, it's really interesting how far removed from the business world that the scientists are, and how many of them are, and how far removed those people are from the policymakers. And it's interesting to meet a guy like John Gerhardt, whose team first isolated human stem cells. He suddenly found himself, he spends most of his time now going before congressional committees. He actually had to take a course in how to talk to a politician about this research. The interesting thing I learned from him about that is that when they teach this course, they tell you now when you talk to a congressman, you have to put all the science at the 9th grade level. And when you go to the state legislature, it has to be at the 6th grade level.
How in a democracy do we reach a consensus on whether or not this embryonic material could be utilized for basic science studies, which I think are as important or more important than deriving these therapies directly, of learning what is going on in these cells, which I think is going to have great application to human biology in general. But how do we decide this? And because there's a segment of our population that are opposed to it, and those people who believe that you are a human being or you're a person at the moment of conception, how do we take that into account as opposed to other individuals who feel that you become a person over time in this developmental process of embryogenesis? And whether it's sentience, whatever terms you want to describe where personhood or how personhood evolves, that it is a developmental event. And there should be some latitude in there where you should be able to take material that this is not a person, okay, and utilize it in biologic research. Where that line is one that is not going to be dictated by biology, but we're going to have to choose a line of where that is.
In my opinion, there's no line. If you ask me what is human, in my view, the human species is inherently that species that seeks to advance its own horizons. We didn't stay in the ground. We didn't even stay on the planet. We're not staying with the limitations of our biology. We're constantly moving on to new frontiers. And we ultimately will literally redesign our bodies and brains. We already have enhancements, maybe some of them aren't very good, of all of our body parts and